Well, a group of self-styled modern Liberals, which are moderates, led by the member for Wentworth Dave Sharma, want Scott Morrison to set more ambitious medium-term climate targets. In a speech to the UNSW Energy Institute today, Sharma said Australia should adopt a 40 to 45% emissions reduction target by 2035, on top of the 26 to 28% target by 2030 set by Malcolm Turnbull as part of the Paris Agreement. This is all, again, in addition to net zero by 2050. For his analysis, I'm joined from Sydney by Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell. What's interesting, Dave Sharma's being backed in here, Andrew, by the likes of Trent Zimmerman in North Sydney, Jason Falinski in Bronwyn Bishop's old seat, who clearly panicked about losing their seats in Sydney's well-heeled leafy suburbs. But is this good politics for the Morrison government to ramp up and introduce for the first time in the debate a medium-term target ahead of even Labor? Labor haven't got one there. Bowen's mused about it, but they haven't got one on the table, given that they also want to win seats in the Hunter, like Hunter and Patterson.
Yes, well, since lockdown, I think Hunter and Patterson have looked a bit slimmer as prospects when they were really looking to win them prior to that. But I'd have to say that I just don't think this will happen. I think this is a wish by Dave Sharma. I actually understand, Peter, that not every moderate MP is that happy with Dave Sharma front-running this particular line. From Sharma's point of view, he sees it as, apart from, you know, in his electorate, as you point out, it would be popular. He sees it as an economic as well as an environmental issue. He sees it as the nuclear subs deal's been done. Britain and America will want something in return. But there's no way Scott Morrison's doing a medium-term target. And how much different is this target than what helped lose Bill Shorten the election of 45% reduction by 2030?
It's crazy.
What has been put to me, however, though, is that Australia is doing so well on its target, it's likely to hit 35% reduction by 2030 anyway. So I think what you'll potentially see in Glasgow is Australia committing to net zero by 2050 with a plan to do so. They'll argue they have a plan, other countries don't have a plan. Labor doesn't have a plan, but certainly no medium target. So Dave Sharma's on a frolic in terms of that, I think.
Yeah, I can't understand. Sharma's a smart guy. Why he thinks now that we've got the nuclear sub deal without a target, he needs to find one in his back pocket and offer it up when we haven't got a medium-term target on the table. We haven't had one, I can't think, in any of the negotiations in this sort of time frame, and clearly nor has Labor. So why put your head above the parapet here? I think it's crazy. But anyway, it must be Wentworth politics. Maybe Malcolm's talking about coming back as an independent. Who knows? I want to ask you about some interesting polling published in 9 newspapers today. This was a survey by Resolve Strategic. It shows that Labor's primary vote has in fact fallen by 5 points since June to 31%. Now that's low. They like to have it in mid-30s, high 30s if they can, but 31's low. But most interestingly, Andrew, support for others. This is One Nation, the independents and other parties. If you add them all together, that's risen from 15% in June to 20% now. That's 1/5 of the vote parked away. That's without you even including the Greens. The Greens at 10%. That makes about a third of the electorate that is shifting away from the two major parties. And interestingly too, if you look at the news poll out, first reported yesterday, backed in again in the Australian today, they show the PM's losing plenty of skin over handling of the pandemic, but it's not going to Albanese. What he's losing is turning up in the ratings for the Premier, including Daniel Andrews down here in Victoria. They're all holding up. What's your read of it all?
Well, it's extraordinary, Daniel Andrews' approval rating when you've been in lockdown 220 days. I mean, how does it happen? He's in the 60s. So these daily press conferences are really helping the Premiers, and so's Scott Morrison kind of devolving responsibility to them. I'm a bit confused as to these polls, Peter. You've got Labor primary vote news poll of 38, and you've got that Resolve poll by Jim Reid, who I know the Liberal Party respects, at 31. Well, the Resolve poll has Morrison walloping Labor, and yet we know he's had issues with the vaccine rollout and the lockdowns and so forth. So probably the truth's in between. If the truth's in between, by the way, that's bad news for Anthony Albanese. He needs the news poll to be accurate. But I think it's worth pointing out that the news poll at the last election had Labor's primary vote 2.5% higher than it turned out to be. And if that's the case this time, Scott Morrison's in with a chance of a majority, when really I would have thought a hung parliament's probably the most likely outcome at this snapshot in time. But the Resolve polling, if any way accurate, is bad news for Labor. The News poll, bad news for the coalition. It's rare to see this level of disparity between the major polls, but maybe the Resolve poll is a wake-up call for Labor, given News poll hasn't been always on the money, certainly wasn't the last federal election.
Look, my read of it, when you see polls, published polls, very different obviously than private party polling, but when you see published polls that are this volatile, that says to me that the electorate's volatile. The electorate is moving around, and I think part of the reason why Labor takes comfort in Victoria from Daniel Andrews is there isn't, at this stage, a strong opposition. People are in lockdown. They're focused on the immediate issues of lockdown. They're not looking out further beyond probably the end of the year. I think it would be very hard to poll with any great certainty in Australia at the moment, and I think that Labor, given that, nonetheless, with all the heat on Scott Morrison, vaccine rollout and other things, they would want to be further ahead than these polls show for Anthony Albanese.
And what you pointed out before, the minor party vote is very high. That Resolve poll, the others as high as 7%. If there's doubt in an election, they often gravitate to an incumbent, particularly a Conservative incumbent. And you're spot on there, Peter. You want to be further ahead as an opposition. So it came in the News, even if we take the News poll as accurate, which I don't think it is, it came in, and the government certainly doesn't think it is, it came in from 54 to 53 to Morrison. An election campaign starts at 52, Morrison's probably winning, because the incumbent generally gets a couple of percent in the campaign unless they really stuff it up. So Morrison's got a confidence about him at the moment that he can get there. One of his people said to me once he's often better when he's a little bit behind, and that's exactly where he's perceived to be. So it's all down to him, really.
Yeah, look, we'll get to Christmas, and I tell you what, it'll be on the moment we get back around Australia Day. That's when I'll be really interested in the polls. Andrew Clennell, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter.